If you listen to the headlines or scroll through the comments on social media, you might think that foreigners are running wild in Japan, that 3% of the population is absolutely crime ridden.
Business owner, educator, and lifelong observer of politics and economics, making sense of complex issues.
Today I'm going to have a look at some of those statistics and just generally talk about that topic and statistics in general. I'm going to kind of detail how they tell a story, and even when the numbers are right, they can still be wrong. Of about 170,000 arrests in 2023, about 5% were foreigners. About 7,000, something like that. If you were to break it down per capita, it's like 2.9%, roughly 3% for foreigners as opposed to for Japanese. 1.28. So 1.3. So you've got about 3% of foreigners being arrested and just over 1% of Japanese being arrested. Obviously, the majority of people being arrested are Japanese, but per capita, as a percent of their population, there's way more foreigners being arrested than Japanese. Now, for some people, that tells us that foreigners are committing a lot of crime. Japanese, not so much. But just a quick little think about that, and you can see that, well, this is how I see it. When there's a number that's like that, where it's, you know, multiple times bigger, it's like, hold on, what's going on here? It can't really be that the immigration system is failing so badly that the criminal population of foreigners in Japan is so high that it's 3 times more than the domestic population. That would be incredible. And as it turns out, that is incredible, or should I say, incredulous. Unbelievable. So there's a lot of different factors, and I'll just go through them really briefly. The first one, obviously, is just going to be targeting. I've talked about this in another video when the police, a long time ago, were challenged to improve their English. They were told to go and target foreigners, not necessarily to start arresting them, but to practice their English, go and talk to them. So obviously you have a whole police force that's being raised as part of their training to recognize foreigners and, associate with them. Obviously, you're going to immediately increase your statistics more, as police are more likely to talk to random foreigners than they are to talk to random Japanese. Obviously, even with the foreigner population only being less than 3%, if that's what you're targeting in your normal course of work, you're going to be dealing with a lot more foreigners. There's a whole bunch of other things. In Japan, too, there's this situation where there are a whole cohort of the population that are, for all intents and purposes, for any other country in the world, Japanese. But because they're not ethnic Japanese, they were brought over during the colonial period, which ended in World War II. So at least since World War II, these people have existed in Japan. So these people are now very elderly. They have children. Some of them will have citizenship, some of them won't, and they are counted as foreigners. So that's one cohort. Another aspect to consider when you're looking at what is the population overall in Japan as compared to the overall foreign population, you're including in your foreign population, or sorry, you're including in your domestic population, your Japanese population, babies, kids, children, elderly, as part of that number. Now, when you look at the cohort of foreigners that are arriving in Japan, you find that you don't have so many babies. You don't have so many elderly. You don't even have so many school-age children. You're mostly looking at people that are aged between late teens, early 20s to late 30s, 40s. So that's a cohort that if we looked at only the Japanese segment of that population, we might find that crime rates are a little bit higher there as well. You know, Japan's median age is 49, and that doesn't really track with the foreign population here, me being the exception. And generally, these people that are arriving in Japan are young, and we know that generally younger people are the ones committing crime. It's going to be the same in the Japanese population. So if you can now imagine that we're comparing a very age tight group of people in the foreign community compared to the overall full Japanese population that includes a much more diverse age group. Further, they are being targeted more. So they're constantly being checked, they are constantly being approached, they are always being watched. Something anecdotally I can tell you is true. I notice it a lot, especially in stores. So, you know, they are being caught at higher rates because they're being watched at higher rates. I've talked further in other videos about this, and it's also the case that when we compare the crimes that are being committed by foreigners to the crimes that are being committed by Japanese, there is a great discrepancy there. Of course, both sides are committing a full range of crimes. There's no doubt about that. But you will find that a large part of the foreigner crime is misdemeanors that include a lot of administrative ones. Visa overstays, visa problems, address issues, insurance issues, things that are, you know, we could say possible because they are foreigners that may be taking advantage, but also things that are just not very serious. For Japanese, those things are a little bit harder to do, but they also do them. There are issues with insurance, there are issues with driver's licenses. There's a whole, you know, part of the population that continues to drive without driver's licenses. Something also anecdotally I can attest to in my area. So it is the case that many people are being caught in the foreign community for crimes that are falling well below what we might consider serious crimes. Although there are, the rates at which they are happening are very low. If we could split that rate of foreigner crime into those segments and then compare them by age with Japanese, we might get a better picture of what's happening. And as I've said before, if there are so many people coming into the country that are capable of doing this or likely to do this, then it is a failure of immigration. One of the other statistics that came up was that a lot of the foreigners that were being arrested were part of groups. And this is how, actually, I forget the English, and I forget the Japanese, but it's basically organized crime. There's a special way they call it group crime. And you will find that a lot of these group crimes are committed and they're caught. The foreigners are caught, but they're organized domestically. So people are brought in to do these things. This happens, and everybody knows this, that the groups that control some of the crime in Japan use people from other countries to do those crimes for them. There's a whole range that goes from, let's say, nightclub work to organized break-ins and other things like that. So in this video, what I'm wanting to show to you is that it's very much not the case that Japan is suffering from some kind of foreign crime wave that is due to the fact that more foreigners are being let in. And it is true that the foreign population is growing. Now, some politicians have called for there to be caps on this. Again, these statistics are interesting to me. One group wants to limit the foreign population to 5%, which means that my area would over double. But I don't know what the statistics are for Shibuya and Shinjuku and other places in Tokyo. I imagine they're much, much higher, and they would need to be reduced in that case. So it's interesting to look at these numbers and see that, okay, if you've got a 20% foreign population in Shinjuku and they're being targeted by the police, and the police are arresting them at higher rates than the local Japanese that are committing crimes in my area, you're going to get a very distorted view. You're going to come to the conclusion that there are a lot of foreigners committing a lot of crime. But what it really comes down to is the perception. And the perception is visible that there are many, many more foreigners coming to Japan, especially as tourists, and Japanese and people who've been long term here like me are seeing this, and they have their own anecdotal evidence that this is happening. I've had people say to me, in my area, the number of foreigners has increased a lot, and so has crime. And they automatically say, well, if there's A and then B happens, it must have been because of A. And this is a very wrong-footed thing to do. You cannot say that because of this, another thing that happened at the same time, that is being caused by this. Japan is in economic decline. No one's going to argue in that. There are people that are bullish on Japan. I want to be. But it is the case that wages, and although some people have pointed out to me that wages have increased, what did someone tell me? Wages have increased 40% in the last 20 years or something for starting salary at a company. And my first response on hearing that number was, yeah, 40% of not much is not much. Starting salaries in Japan were notoriously low. And I think I then went and looked at median wages, and you certainly did not see a 40% growth in 20 years there. So to me, that signals a recruitment issue. That signals a population issue. You know, this is how you need to look at numbers. Like, if starting wages went up 40%, why? If median wages didn't go up that much, why? And it's to do with the fact that inflation has not happened in Japan until recently, in the last couple of years. And so wages didn't go. And in fact, some economists were saying out loud that Japanese were benefiting from wage growth without having wage growth, because prices had been falling so much. Absolutely. Personally, that disgusts me. But there is an argument for it. You can be said, it can be said, and you can get away with it. But it doesn't account for the fact that gasoline prices have gone up so much, that wheat prices have gone up so much. Now rice prices are going up a lot, and a whole range of necessary expenses have gone up so much in that time, and that the basket of goods that they might be fairly evaluating is an example that Japanese median salaried employees have made gains is it's a bit hard to swallow. So this is the reality, that wages have not grown in 30 years. The yen's just been devalued, massive inflation, even though as a percentage it may be relatively small. A lot of stuff has gone up a lot, and people are very much way worse off than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and 20 years ago. If the starting salary has gone up 40%, that's fantastic. Everyone else's salary needs to go up 40%. And I really believe that this is probably the reason I do this. That it makes me so annoyed that there is no mechanism for wages to increase in Japan. I think we had the biggest wage increase agreement ever this year, and I think it was something like 2%. It might have been 3%, and you just need to look at it, and a very simple glance at the cost of living, and wages need to go up 20%. And Japanese are suffering. Foreigners living in Japan long term are suffering. The yen has gone down, and crime statistically is not increasing. When you look at the numbers, it's surprising, but it will. And it can't just be put on foreigners. It can't just be put on the fact that tourism is now a thing in Japan because Japan is a cheap destination. Now, there will be people coming over here and doing things. That is unfortunate. But it's not the case that it is causing the decline in Japan. The decline in Japan is due to the economics. The economic situation is due to the lack of wage growth, and as it is elsewhere, it's due to malaise. It's due to 30, 40 years of neoliberal economics globally that has gutted the middle class. And Japan has been a great example of a very fairly egalitarian society with a huge middle class. That will be gone in a few decades. That is shrinking. It has to shrink because they can no longer afford to sustain that lifestyle, and the corporations, the companies, won't pay the wages to keep it. This is Lang Standard. Make sure you subscribe, and I'll be making more videos, not always about Japan, a lot of things.
If you're still here, honestly, you have no idea how much it helps if you subscribe. I'll keep these coming.